So commissioners, this morning we have Gordon Wilson with FCS Group and Michael Lubavitch with Kennedy Jenks. And they are both here to share information both on the preliminary design report that has been completed at this stage of the game. And that's identifying the project or the preferred alternative for extending sewer within the boundary and ultimately to provide service to the Puget Sound Industrial Center. Michael will spend about 15 minutes or so going over what that looks like and how we arrived at this project and the cost estimates associated with the cost. And then Gordon will follow up with his technical memo identifying the financial considerations for the project and highlights, and we'll open it up to, at any time, any questions you may have about what it is that's being described and making sure we've got a thorough understanding of what it is we're looking at in all of this paper here. So if that's acceptable and agreeable, all right. Michael, it's all you.
All right, thank you. So, as you know, we went through a process, quite a long process of planning and stakeholder outreach engagement to come up to where we are today. When we met last summer, we just had finished the conceptual workshop, conceptual alternatives development workshop, and we're taking feedback on the 3 or 4 alternatives that were developed that would go into the evaluation. So we provided some feedback, we modified a couple of the alternatives, took that into the next step, and then through the evaluation, which is described in the pre-design report, kind of settled on the preferred alternative being what we call alternative 4 at the time. Over the next several months, we had modified that alternative just based on new information we had, and one is to maximize or I guess optimize the service area potential for that alternative. So a couple of the changes that you'll see that are discussed in the report is that what we're calling the UGA lift station, or the lift station that will be within the Belfair UGA, has moved to the other side of SR3, so they can to open up more of the service area that the lift station can serve, which of course extended the gravity and the pressure force main that run to and from the pump station. So what we're looking at here in the pre-design report, it's executive summary figure 6. We show how the projects can be broken up or will be broken up into several phases. What we're talking about for this phase of the work is phase 1. Phase 2 and phase 3 are to happen later when growth in the PSIC actually begins, and that's phase 2. And then beyond that is phase 3, is when the area within the PSIC has expanded to a point where they need their own dedicated sewer line. So what I want to talk about a little bit here is project, or phase 1 of this project, which is what we'll be moving into final design and hopefully implementation in the next year. So phase 1, as you see, is kind of highlighted, I guess, in the executive summary. I'm not sure if it's actually really fully in that packet there.
We want to.
Let me open up the packet.
Do I have one in my? Oh, you might. Yeah.
So you're looking at that's figure 2. So flip to figure 6 of the executive summary, ES-6. One more.
When I see paper in front of him, I just assume it's paper for all of us because he doesn't use paper.
So,
Go ahead.
okay. So what we're looking at for phase 1 is a new lift station, which is the UGA lift station, which We'd like to have everything flow by gravity if possible. Unfortunately, it doesn't always all slope towards the point of termination. So what we're looking at here is extending the existing sewer that runs up SR3 and extending it up through the frontage roads that have currently been made through this area of the UGA. There's also a water line from Belfair Water District that runs through this area. So since the trees have already been cut and the path has already been kind of been made, the idea was to really utilize that similar path for the sewer line. The way it's laid out now, and there's more detail, and we advanced this is conceptual from late last year, and we've actually advanced the design to the pre-design level, and that's in one of the appendices in the actual pre-design report. It shows the more current path, but it runs by gravity through most of this area, and then there's going to be a segment of force main that runs from the pump station to that gravity extension, which will then run all the way down through the existing collection system and then up to the water reclamation facility. So what we're looking at here is like I said, a new lift station north of SR3, and then a force main that runs to the new proposed sewer gravity extension that crosses the railroad tracks and then goes down the hill. It also includes a portion of gravity main that runs up to the edge of the county line that can be used to serve the city of Bremerton in the future. We don't anticipate growth to happen in the immediate year or two, but they do have a requirement to show some growth by 2025, and so that's why we've phased phase 2 the way that we have. So we're not including a bunch of additional capital like the additional pump station, freight corridor lift station, and associated force main as part of this project, or part of this phase. So right now there's a portion of this line that's being considered for construction in the near term because the MTA roundabout is being built, and so instead of having to come in through later and do a trenchless crossing under that highway, the idea was to install gravity and force main as a part of that project using open trench methods, which is going to be less expensive. So taking advantage of that construction window. That has not yet been confirmed or decided yet, but preliminary design plans have been put in front of WashDOT and Mason Transit Authority for review and comments, and then hopefully decide here soon what to do.
So what's a realistic timeline on getting that in? I mean, where are they in their project, and what should we be doing in order to make sure that that's something that's included?
So as far as I've been told in the last couple of weeks and leading up to this point is I understand they are about to start utility work in this area within the next week or two. So if they haven't already talked about it, they're planning to do that. I was told early middle of February. So that's really now is when they're anticipating. I think there's some other schedule impacts that are going on besides just that. Belfair's Water District wants to put a water line in, so it might delay the schedule a little bit, but it is, as far as I know, that decision is made fairly soon in order to get that in there because they have to still order materials. It's probably the longest lead item might be the casing that's required, even though it's open trench construction. It still has to meet WashDOT's requirements for the crossing, which requires that that the pressure line's cased.
Lady Jenks, excuse me, I thank Michael and his team. They turned around the design drawings very quickly and got those to MTA and DOT as part of the coordination to get dialed in. We also recently made a contract amendment to our current grant that was preliminary engineering and had that modified to include construction as well. So we'll be able to build this construction work to our existing grant and get that rolling. DOT had made some commitments to be able to turn around their review and approval within
I said, look, it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks, I believe.
Phenomenal, if that's true.
Which totally shocked the heck, yeah, exactly.
Which begs the question.
Right.
You can do that in 2 weeks.
Yes. Yeah, so that clock has been ticking.
But
I think
you
we've
know,
got about a week or so.
I guess maybe my bigger question is, we're not at risk of losing the opportunity.
No,
Okay.
no, at this
We'll
point,
be
I
able to
do not
realize the
believe.
benefit of having the big hole in the ground to put pipe in,
Yes, yes.
in line with what they're doing, okay.
Yeah, MTA and DOT has been very committed to make that happen.
Okay, great.
And so, and in the packet, the board packet here, the last page it shows the drawing that was put in front of MCA. That was a early version of the drawing. There's a profile associated with it that was recently developed as well, showing that that the pipe can travel under the road where we say it will go without hitting any of the other utilities. So that just shows a general plan view of the crossing. And so you'll see there's one of the things we added in that crossing, and it's still, we can still can be modified if needed. All of your pump stations, or the major pump stations, have dual force mains. And since we hadn't really made a decision, that's really more of a next stage of design decision, what to include in terms of 2 force mains or 1. So what we did was, in that design, you'll see there's 1 casing. It's a 30-inch casing that holds 2 force mains. We could reduce the casing and put 1 force main in, or keep it as is, and you can decide whether or not you want to, keep the second force main, or, connect them both to a single force main on either side at the end. It gives you options. Since you've already got the casing, it's really a lot of the work. The material cost is not going to be significant compared to just the amount of construction work that the actual labor and equipment requirements.
Here's a feminist.
Oh, there is a profile on this one. That's the latest one. Oh wait, this is what I sent you. Okay, so this is a version of the profile that was sent to MTA and WashDOT. So you'll see there's the casing, and this is just for the pressure main. But I want to give it as you see, there's a consistent slope on there, just so if there is any air in the line, we can purge it out through relief valves. Any questions about the proposed improvements? So again, what you see highlighted in the reddish pink color is what would be part of the next phase of work, which is the final design. So final design for that piece of it, which will then go into construction.
So there's some loose ends that I'm still worried about before we do anything when it comes to who pays for what and how that goes. But on this, the second part, so you're saying this is the second phase here?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's actually, I'm good with that, because I'm concerned. I'm worried about planning to build outside of Mason County without things that are in place,
Yeah.
agreements and stuff like that on how it will be used and what will be happening. So before we get too far, I want to know that we have those things in place to protect Belfair.
For sure. One of the main considerations we had in the approach to this was just knowing that there's potential development within the UGA that could really benefit just the financial model, to try to really accommodate that through this approach, and not putting in infrastructure that will predominantly sit and serve areas that are really dedicated outside of the UGA. So we talked about like the Bremerton, city of Bremerton area. That was one of the reasons we went away from this being part of phase 1, this freight corridor force main being part of phase 1, is that that investment would be made, and it may just sit there for a while, because development within the PSIC area is very uncertain. And so this accommodates the near-term growth that's anticipated.
One of the things that's coming up right now that makes this
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Depending on, again, so as far as I know, Bremerton hasn't put together a plan yet in terms of how they're going to serve water out in this area. So that's something that's up for, for discussion. If they decide that they want to draw water from here and all that sewer is going to be collected and treated essentially outside of that, that aquifer, then there's potential for reclaimed water to be run back to this area for water rights. Likewise, anywhere else within the UGA where Belfair Water District does not serve, as long as we can show it's not going to be a direct one-to-one, but a correlation between groundwater extraction for drinking water purposes and then infiltration for recharge. There's potential to get water rights credits for that work.
Their goal is not more water rights, though. It's the new way they're looking at it is just trying to put it back in the ground. It's a replacement, has nothing to do with gaining more rights at all. So they're looking to have projects that will fund taking the water that we have or in the future and putting it out there to be reused so they don't pull more out. So
Right.
just to let you know.
Understood. That's part of the ecology's push for the reclaimed water, new water rule on water rights impairment, and then also anti-degradation. So
It's also part of their sub-area plan. Payment for that.
one of the things that that really tie into that is that the water reclamation facility is currently only permitted for 125,000 gallons a day for effluent discharge. So, as of now, the facility, even though it's designed to treat 375,000 gallons a day, you're limited by how much you can actually discharge. So what you can do with that. And so one of the decisions that needs to be made fairly soon, I think, in terms of the planning, how to plan this out, part of the general sewer plan portion of the project is, are you going to expand the spray field, or are you going to look at other discharge locations, like you're saying, maybe infiltration elsewhere?
Yeah, and that's been one of our problems with that system since we started. We knew that, I wasn't here, even afterwards, but we knew that it's just not set up for the full discharge amount, and that takes more money. We'd have to purchase more
Right.
right away. Easement for spray field at the bare minimum. Currently, we're actually on somebody else's property as it is, without it being covered, our pond and stuff. We have a few clouds.
Yeah, I don't know how much you want to, we can maybe not get in too much into that, but yeah, in terms of the irrigation itself, it's.
Just be aware of that. That might be something that brings it forward to run it down that road.
Absolutely.
And Michael and Richard have been coordinating with ecology. They've had at least 2 meetings on exactly that topic and scoping and making sure that we're including that within the general plan.
Yeah, and in ecology, one of the challenges I've had working with them is that they're not very forward about what they would like you to do. They want to see what your plan is.
So as I say, they're waiting for us to decide the plans.
Right.
Especially at the wire meetings and stuff. But I'll give you an example though. If we had purple pipe already in existence, we wouldn't have lost a big concrete manufacturer that was here.
Mm-hmm.
Belfair Water was just way too much money for them. They wouldn't work with them, and we lost them.
They had a hard time paying the rates of
That
potable water.
And at the time, there was a hard time getting the expansion of more water to them.
Okay.
Between all of it,
I gotcha. Right.
they just decided it wasn't beneficial.
Yeah.
So we lost them. And that was a bummer, because they'd been there for a long time.
Because you can certainly supply a good volume of reclaimed water, but you'd be surprised if it was significantly cheaper than the drinking water that would be provided by Belfair.
Belfair's pretty high.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yes, it's one of the highest in the state of Washington
Yeah,
by
it is.
far. Yeah.
Okay.
No, they're excessive.
Good to know.
With a commercial slap on the hand, the more you use, the higher it gets.
Okay. Yeah, and like I said, so volume-wise, you certainly could produce a lot of volume, and there are limitations to your spray field that could make the reclaimed water option complement the existing system. So there are a lot of benefits to the reclaimed water option. It's just a matter of really where you can put it to get beneficial use.
This is what you're gonna use it for, may
Yeah.
determine the next level of treatment. Really, I mean, there's a lot of uses for it.
So where we've seen next steps in that reclaimed water realm is that study that's part of the 2018 Purple Book requirements for the reclaimed water rule would be the next step to then put in front of the ecology to say, hey, here's our study plan. This is where we plan to use it. This is based on quality and quantity, how we're going to impact the aquifers. If it's going to be for infiltration or recharge, or here are the water rights that we're going to not impair or impair by setting it to as a reclaimed water source to a commercial or industrial entity. So that'd be the next step in that process for reclaimed water, is to perform that study, because ecology won't review anything and won't allow anything really to be constructed if it's related to reclaimed water if that study hasn't been done yet. It's retroactive on your facility since you were a reclaimed water facility before that new rule came out, but it's a requirement for all facilities that go through any kind of reclaimed water upgrades.
And there are no reclaim costs in the project at this time?
Yeah.
Not in phase one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it would be a phase three.
Yeah, and it could be. This line is really intended to show the force main is conveying sewer from.
Oh, I see, it's one way.
Yeah, one way, but while you're constructing this, you certainly could drop in widen the trench, drop in an extra line, instead of reclaim water that way.
Do you know if there's a distance that they have to maintain between sewer and purple pipe?
The 10 feet is generally the rule for between pipes. Depending on, I think you can probably revisit that since it's generally, probably gonna say probably just 10 feet.
10 feet.
Would be what you'd be sticking with.
Without any sort of special construction, right?
Like casing
You
or-
put it right next
yeah.
to it, you want to case the whole
But
thing.
that will be
If you're
I
space
was gonna say,
limited.
that's
Yeah.
more expensive
hard enough
than
to
the
get it in the first place,
additional.
but.
But you're going through undeveloped areas, so it wouldn't be as significant as if it was going through a street that's.
Yeah, except for we don't have even the right of ways established for any of that at this point.
Mhm.
So to extend and widen that right of way.
Yeah.
Any questions, commissioners, about the project itself, or does that make sense and hit the mark based on comments and suggestions that you had from the last go-around?
How long of a project timeline would you anticipate with phase one?
So we were anticipating that design would take place, as I was just mentioning earlier, the permitting is going to be the critical path for this project. The design can be done, I would say, fairly quickly relative to the permitting, but depending on all the different agencies, there's the cultural resource, study, the SEPA. We don't think we have to go get a core permit because there's no navigable waterways, I think, that are being affected by this, or wetlands that flow into navigable waterways. So we don't think there's going to be a core permit required, but that needs to be confirmed still. So those are some of the things that are going to be more on the critical path. There's even easement requirements,
Railroad crossing.
like the railroad crossing and just getting the washout easement as well. So we were anticipating just probably around 10 months to get the next phase of work prepared for bid documents, and then construction probably on the order of roughly a year to get that constructed.
The financial forecast assumed about July of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So we're a little bit cautious about the timing of that.
Yeah. There are some phases, and depending on how you phase it, and if there's pressure to get it in sooner, there's portions of it that can be done upfront or can be prioritized that could provide service, like any portion of the gravity extension that could immediately provide beneficial use once it's constructed, and not need the pump station or lift station to convey flow. So if the gravity portions were prioritized, and if that's where areas of growth were imminent, then in terms of the financial forecast, you can start receiving benefit there prior to the rest of it necessarily being constructed. Wherever it flows to the pump station, that has to be done before anything can be beneficially used.
And
There's
in
a
terms
yeah.
of predicted development patterns, in talking with the development community, it sounds as though that timeline is right on track with things that they've got in the hopper. They may have some projects that might be slightly ahead, but timing seems to be good with what they're predicting.
Any possibility of private partnerships that
Yes.
would accelerate timeline or change?
It wouldn't necessarily change the timeline, it changes the financial picture, but not the timeline per se.
But because of that, and that's the way, because as we know, I don't want to borrow money, borrow some if it's to me. But that public-private partnership appears to be having that planning, permitting, starting that process, because we can't, if we're going to get this EIS and everything else set up, we don't want to have a backlog once we get there. So.
The most immediate that I've heard, actually, unfortunately, is not along the gravity sewer line. That's more in the 16 to 24 month time frame that would be ready. But there are restaurants ready to roll on a sooner timeline, but that would require constructing the lift station and the force main. And not necessarily the bulk of the ERUs. They would definitely pick up ERUs, but not the big bulk of ERUs that we're looking at.
Is this here, is that with the apartment complex?
Yes, yeah, so there's a
On the
mix,
bottom
so
corner.
there's apartments proposed and then also single-family residential a little bit further up the hill. And between those two, the apartments are 200 ERUs projected and the single-family residents are 160 projected ERUs.
The apartment complex is already in the
Yeah.
permit phase and begun. They'll have a full permit, what is it, in another 3 months or 2 months?
Yeah, and some of the things, I mean, they're looking at, so they're also scoping traffic impacts and costs associated with coming out onto SR3. And they should know what that looks like in the next month or two, I'm guessing. And depending on that, that's gonna trigger either a signal or roundabout or some type of intersection.
Hard to do a roundabout on a cliff.
It is, and so that's why.
Just saying.
I know. So but they have to justify that. I mean, that's the first go-to, obviously, and that's what they're working through right now. And what does that cost look like? So
There's no other area that
they're
can
working
have
through
that
all
load.
of the dollars and cents and penciling project at this point. All right, if there's nothing else on that part, we'll turn it over to Gordon to share his
Updated analysis.
updated analysis.
Yeah. I was last before you last July, and then the news was worse. So this is still a difficult situation, but it's not as bad as it was. The work, in fact, I'm gonna step out of sequence just a little bit by saying, the current plan is better than the plan we were working with last July in three clear ways. One is on the cost side, one's on the revenue side, and the other is the clarity of the division of responsibility with the city of Bremerton. On the revenue side, there's more focus on going where there's already good prospects for shorter term development. So there's already a road there, there's already a Belfair Water District line up SR3, and there are already a few businesses there. Whereas the previous plan focused only on PSIC. PSIC is a good prospect down the road. It's got 1,500 acres of land for development, but it needs water and roads and sewer. And the city isn't as far as you are in its thinking about whether and how to move forward. So we could be waiting a little bit for the city, and this allows PSIC to connect. This has a pathway. But it focuses on areas that are more short term. So that's on the revenue side. The costs are lower, and there's more of a clear now versus later, county versus city division of responsibility. So all those things are better than last July. And I was really pleased when I first heard what Loretta and Michael had been working on over the last several months. My goal today is to help you with the decision making. We've got some decisions to make. You need to give an answer to the state. How much of this loan, we've got a loan offer. Do we want to accept the offer? Also, that has implications for the rates. That's part of the commitment. You're committing to the state. You're also saying to the residents there in the current Belfair GA, we're really going forward on this. We're getting our house in order. We're going to do it. We've done some planning, and those are both big steps. And I'm trying to help you with that. There's also some discussions with the city of Bremerton that Loretta will be having that will be helped with the guidance we get from you. The revised plan, as I mentioned, is more favorable than last July. The loan amount last July was $5.8 million. The amount of the in-between option, I gave you three options, and the two were kind of extremes, and one was so optimistic it just, in my dreams, the state pays for $11 million. And the second one was most pessimistic. The one that I thought might be close to reality is what I'm calling scenario 2. That one involved a $5.8 million loan. Now we're looking at a $4.9 million loan with the potential, once the project's completed, for 5% loan forgiveness. So the amount of debt service you're paying is actually 4.65. The amount you'd be saying yes to the state for is 4.9. Little difference in numbers there. Therefore the annual debt service is less, and that's the big number that's at risk here. And last July we were looking at about $315,000. Now it's $252,000. And a big reason for that improved forecast is the fact that the capital cost is so much less. Last July, my in-between scenario assumed $4 million of help. Well, we didn't get $4 million. We only got $2.5. But the costs are so much less now by taking advantage of the existing collection system, routing it, to the nearest point instead of just focusing only on that line along the bypass. So now, just to refresh your memory, the Belfair system, as you know, is still in a deep hole, and it will take years of sustained growth to achieve financial balance. And unfortunately, the only way to put the utility in a position to achieve sustained growth is by extending more sewer lines. Extending more sewer lines means borrowing more money. Borrowing more money means digging the hole deeper at first. That's the dilemma you face. That's the uncomfortable position. When you accept that $4.9 million state loan, you're increasing the bet. You're saying the only way out is to go forward. And that means for some period of time, I'm going to be paying more in debt service than I am already, and it's a lot already. So you can't, you know, when you accept that loan and build a project, you can't guarantee development on a particular schedule, but you can guarantee that the land is developable. So when you have conversations with developers, you've got something to bring to the table. Now, there is the hunker down strategy. You could always say, I'm not spending another nickel on this system, I'm just gonna jack up the rates, get rid of the operating deficit, and just let us sit forever. That's one approach you could take, but it would mean jacking up the rates to $137 a month, nobody likes that, and it would mean leaving those current Belfair customers stuck with the operating cost of a big system that was designed for a bigger customer base. And it wouldn't achieve the purpose of the Belfair system. So that's, I just don't think that's a way out. I think the only way out is through an extension of the pipe, getting more customers, which allows more new development in areas where there are prospects. I just want to remind you, this is a conclusion I came to last July, and it's still true, that under any realistic growth scenario, you should expect to have to subsidize the debt service for the existing treatment plant through its life. You know, 2029 or 2034, I can't remember how far, but it's, you know, you eventually do balance, but that's partly because of growth and partly because the original debt service drops off. You get to that 20-year point. There could be relief for the existing debt burden conceivably from the state legislature, but it's not going to be generated by the Belfair system revenue before the debt is scheduled. The growth just won't happen fast enough. So that's a reality that we're working with there. The break-even point, the point where the incremental cost of the new distance is paying for itself. The amount of growth that would pay for it is about 178 ERUs. So if you get that apartment complex and those 160 single-family homes, you've won the lottery. Yeah, you're already paid for the incremental cost of this extension. You still got to dig out of that original hole.
2 years.
Yeah, and over time, you know, nothing is easy.
Right.
Nothing ever happens.
For 2 years.
I know, but my point is, I'm trying to give you a sense of scale.
Yes.
And it would take, in order to fully balance the system, it would take average development of 20 ERUs per year. That's not impossible, but it would be a surge. And, you know, those 160 houses would not only have to be built, they'd have to be occupied. So there's it's not, you know, a guaranteed. But, you know, like I said, you'd be making it developable and putting yourself in a position to get out. And the prospect of paying for this incremental investment is not as daunting as getting rid of the entire subsidy, the current subsidy. The part of this puzzle, you know, one of the pieces to the puzzle has to do with the rates. And Loretta mentioned to me that some months ago you brought forward the question for the raise the rates, and you declined to do that, and I sympathize with that because you really didn't have the financial picture, but I think if you're committed enough to say yes to the state and take on the debt burden, then you're committed enough to go back to the ratepayers. What I assumed is the maximum tolerable rate, which is $108 in 2020. That is the equivalent of the end of 2016, which was the 5-year commitment to $96 rates, starting 2017, 18, 19, 20. That's 4 years at 3% per year. That's how you get to $108. And so, and $96 was the amount that was deemed to be the maximum tolerable back in the day. That was when the system was first being built, and the commission at the time said, we don't think people will be willing to pay any more than that, and we're going to guarantee for 5 years, willing to subsidize if necessary. And indeed, we have been subsidizing. We made good on that commitment, and it expired 4 years ago. And so I assumed that as part of this picture, part of making it work, that would be something the commission would be willing to do. If you're not willing to do that, it means the subsidy's higher. You know, that's, the money comes from somewhere. And so that's but I think one part of it, in fact, I figured out that even with no growth at all, just raising the rates gets you about 44% of the way to the break-even point, paying for this incremental pipe extension. That's notable, and that is under your control. Development's not under your control, but the rate is. It's hard, of course, but I think it is a responsible thing to do at this stage, because it's been a long time that people have been at $96. In Allen, people pay $113, and that's in a similar situation. That it's a relatively new system, and new sewer systems are expensive everywhere. That's part of the burden of building a new system. In our couple of other comments I wanted to make, one is that in my forecast, I assumed that the CFC would be used for future capital, not for debt service. CFC can't be used for operating costs legally, but it could be used for debt service, but I don't recommend that. This system is not done growing. You've got other areas where there's going to be a need for extension, and you need a source of capital, to at least seed capital to get that going. So I just don't think it would be wise to assume it, as part of the financial planning, nor to actually spend it on debt service in future years. When you get those CFCs, that revenue, I recommend that it be committed for capital purposes. Another thing, just to remind you, this is a little analysis I did last July. It still holds up. And that is that the area itself has plenty of capacity. The land, there's enough land there to balance. Even if there's nothing from PSIC, just in that Newkirk Road area. And that was it was based on some broad assumptions that I talked about last July, but it only used up about 30% of the capacity, the land capacity. I thought, even with some broad assumptions, there's enough cushion there that you don't have to worry about that particular angle. Whether people will develop, that's a different question, but at least there's space. Also, in the July 2019 memo, I just wanted to remind you of this. This is still the case. There are risks inherent in the funding sources the county has been using to subsidize the Belfair system. The 09 sales tax increment and the REIT are sensitive to the economy. The economy goes up and the economy goes down. Last summer you set aside, started creating a reserve for the potential downturn, and that's a good thing, because it's just good to be aware of, cautious about that source. And also, my last comment is that I talk about 28 new ERUs per year. That's not entirely speculative. There is a willing property owner, David Overton. There are some other property owners who have talked to the staff, and there are prospects, relatively near term in terms of development. There are prospects for getting out of this hole. But it would, I think candidly, I think the prospects of winning the bet, of regaining the incremental cost of this pipe is pretty good. The cost of, the ability to get out of the overall hole is really tough, and I think it's going to take retiring the original debt service at the same time as growth. I just don't think it's going to happen before 2034. Yeah, that's when you get relieved of a huge amount of debt service on the original treatment plant. But I think this is a way forward. So in the near term, you've got 3 decisions to make. You've got to give an answer to the state. I don't know if the state even needs a forecast of how much you actually plan to draw on the loan. If not, you could say, we'll take the whole $8 million, but in reality, you're only going to draw about $4.9 million. And then count on them forgiving 5% of that. So that's one decision. The second decision has to do with the rates, and that's a big commitment, and it's a hard thing to do. The forecast also assumes 3% per year after that. So $108 this year, plus 3% for 2021, plus 3%. And to whatever degree you don't do that, then it's more subsidy. So, and then finally, the negotiations with Bremerton, and I've been in touch with Loretta about that. And their planning is not as, like I said, it's not as far along as yours. But they know they've got a big opportunity and a big need to do something. And that big old area, 1,500 acres in South Pisa, doesn't have water, sewer, roads. You can't just wait for developers to do something with it, because that won't happen. So, anyway, that's what I had prepared to share with you. Do you have any questions?
So just to be clear, your recommendation based on your analysis is to take $4.9 million?
Yeah, or accept a loan with the expectation of
That you'll
actually
spend
drawing
$4.9
$4.9 million.
And a point to consider is that if the full 8 is accepted, and if somewhere in the next couple of years, for example, the city of Bremerton says, we'd like to use part of that capacity to get rolling on phase 2, that would be a potential that we could implement an intergovernmental agreement with the city, and they would be responsible for that portion of the debt retirement.
Right. In order for the PSIC to be, South PSIC to be developable, I think that pump station is in the critical path. They got to do it. They don't have to do this because they can always discharge into our existing collection system for a while.
For a while.
But in order to even get it there, they're going to have to build that. So, a couple $1 million, and they might say, hey, you've got some good loan terms. You've got loan capacity. If you've accepted $8 million, even with the expectation of only borrowing 4.9, but then the city comes and says, can we piggyback off your loan? Maybe we can do a deal. But it depends on the state being okay with that strategy. We have to tell the state that for our own purposes, we expect to draw about 4.9.
Your number of $170,000 per year, is that including with the increase?
170,000.
170 plus
Where's that number?
for the payment at the 4.6.
It's 250.
252 is the debt service.
252 is the debt
Yeah,
service.
so we're talking the 170 something, that was with the.
178 URUs.
Assumes $108.14 a month. The escalation does.
And one of the problems.
I said the break even, I characterized that in terms of number.
That made more sense than the numbers I was coming up with. I was actually a little low, which is
Yeah.
strange, right? Because I had 225 in my head, so.
Yes.
Yep.
All right, so
You got it.
that would make sense on that. So on the difference, as we've talked about before, when you talk about the increase in the capacity, there's a difference between Allen and Belfair.
Oh, yeah.
Allen is residential, Belfair is not.
Oh.
Belfair has that false ceiling of 155 gallons per ERU, which spread out over all those businesses, which is the majority of our, I think that's a huge impact when you start, because you're adding dollars per ERU, when you've got a store that has 31 or 33 ERUs, that has a huge impact on when we're already paying way more than they would somewhere else at 250 to 330 gallons for an ERU. So, it's not apples and apples.
No, it's not. And it's not easy, and none of this is easy.
Yeah, so the idea of the capacity, what they could handle, even being compared to what Allen, is completely different. I just wanted to point that out.
That's a fair point.
I myself personally, I would still be nervous about even taking that capacity. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I'd be nervous that, let's say, I'm not here, you're not here, somebody else, they see the capacity and they do what they did to Belfair years ago, just slam something out there and everybody has to pay the debt. That's happened in the past, that's our history, that's what we've done. So that's why I would be nervous of doing that. I absolutely cannot see us putting ourselves in a position of taking $225,000 more debt payments, with the idea that, we're gonna eventually catch up. I get that, but, that's gonna take a lot of years. We're gonna have to pay that extra for a lot of years before we catch up to even come close to breaking even. I'm not saying that I'm not for this. The big thing is gonna be the agreement with the public-private partnership, in my opinion. The closer we can get with that determines how much money we actually really need. Do I think that there's a good opportunity for investment of I hate to even throw a number out there, of, 1, 2 million or whatever on our side for expansion? That's easier to overcome. There's a tolerance level. Those are some of my concerns, just sharing
The
with
thing
you.
that you buy when you take, when you borrow the money is the ability to take initiative. That's, when you leave it for developers, you lose control of the timing. And all you're doing here is building the backbone. There's still other sewer lines that would need to come off of this backbone. And we're assuming that that's entirely on developers.
Yeah, but if we're building the backbone for something where there's nothing there right now, at all, and build it and they will come, I get that, but at some point, there's still a number. What's our total debt right now, do you know? We paid down some, are we down to,
9.
Outstanding?
yeah?
Oh,
I think it's 14 million, 13 million, somewhere.
Huh? That can't be right.
I'm
Outstanding on the
I'm
sewer?
thinking
It's
off.
about $1 million a year.
just under $1 million.
No, I meant, what's our total debt right now? Where are we at right now, our total debt?
Debt service or debt?
Our debt that we're paying the debt service on, what's our total debt? Are we at 11? Are we at 10?
I don't know off
We
the
paid
top
off,
of my
because we paid off some.
head. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, so basically though, my worry is we're talking about a 50% increase in the debt that's crushing us now, and there's nobody there at this moment.
25.
Yeah, it's about a 25% increase, going from $1 million a year to adding $250,000 a year. It's about a 25% increase in the annual burden.
Yeah, on the annual burden, I was just talking about how much we actually owe.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And then with 178 ERUs added per year, that
Then
accounts
you
for
break-
the addition, then we're break even.
Then you
We're
break
back
even with the
to-
additional.
after we get to 178. We
After
can't
you get
add
to 78, then
per
you're
year.
starting to dig out of the original.
That's not possible.
Yeah.
Well,
No, not per year, that's,
if we have an apartment complex or
okay.
a
Now, that's already, the
residential
thing is, that that's already
connected.
coming in now. They're gonna pay for that infrastructure going right to theirs. They're right behind one. So to say we're gonna capitalize on it by spending all the rest of the money, I don't think that's a
The
a
money-
fair statement. And
However the
sorry,
money
three-quarter
comes in,
member.
it's to the good.
It is.
Yeah.
If it doesn't even matter if it's on this line. If you are lucky enough to get an apartment complex with 200 ERUs, then you have covered your extension costs.
Okay, believe me, I see the thing, but it also covers our community right now, we can't afford to do, so.
Yeah, that's true. That'd be a huge step forward if we could get that.
So what's our timeline? What would, from on our side, what would you anticipate in terms of us having to make a decision?
We need to have a decision by April to make good on any loan offer from Commerce, which in my mind, we should start negotiating the loan as soon as possible. They've got terms and conditions, they do have special conditions as part of the loan offer. And those terms and conditions have to do with rates and/or ERUs. And actually what Public Works Board is asking for is quite similar to what the auditor is looking for in terms of a long-term financial strategy and plan for the Belfair sewer. So they're hand in hand about what they're both looking for. And in my mind, what that looks like is our plan is we're going to invest X amount of dollars, and we are going to measure our success and our milestones in we've connected so many ERUs and we have done X, Y, Z with our rates. So that's basically, in my mind, what our financial plan and what our loan agreement will look like with the Public Works
The
Board.
thing that the state wants us to do is the same thing we already want to do, which is get rid of the subsidy.
Right.
Here, we want this to be a self-supporting utility.
By
They're
taking on more
pushing
debt
us.
and paying more subsidy.
Yeah, they're
But
pushing
they-
us in that direction.
That's there, that's,
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive, for sure.
But they understand what the reality is as well.
Again, my problem is in the end, these are my neighbors, and what we thought, what they said they could handle the last time closed a lot of businesses. Because it is an economy of scale. There is a lot more ERUs that they were paying, that was even over the citizen. We lost residents too, and I don't want to belittle the importance of how the effect it will have on them, but the effect it has on those businesses is huge. And you can't afford to lose them. That's one of the biggest problems. I lose one supermarket out there. There's one. How am I gonna get those ERUs? You know?
Supermarkets are one of the biggest.
Yes,
number of-
they are the biggest for us.
Yeah,
But
the QFC
my thing
is-
is, I have two of them, and the QFC, when the one was in
QFC was
Bremerton,
40
they were,
something, 20, I think the Safeway was about 25, and I think the QFC is about 40 something.
yeah.
They're big ERUs.
And
Workhorses.
what they were paying was threefold almost what they were paying the kids at the same time. That's what the danger was that was happening, because of how many gallons that they had and how they were paying by monthly, but the price will come up in kids have. But just saying, it is that kind of an impact, and eventually, you know, I like Vienna sausages, they're $1.98 in Belfair. I pay 49 cents a can for them in Bremerton, just saying.
I think of all the gas you pay.
I know. Actually, it doesn't take that much after a while.
Really, you're offsetting your carbon footprint.
Yeah. I've never thought about that one.
Run some quick numbers, Commissioner, and I know you mentioned that at the last work session we had, what it would look like if we were to implement this rate increase and how that compares to neighboring communities.
One of my biggest concerns would be the first one, I'd like to find out how can they structure it. I'm not saying I'm there, I'm just telling you, I'm afraid of it, but at the same time, that's the question that needs to be answered. Will they allow us to take the whole loan and draw down what we need, so we can prepare for the future? And,
Yes.
you know, then,
If they'll allow that, that's to your advantage.
yes, and so that's a whole, if it's not, then it's a different way of looking at it and the risks that are involved.
Another thing to bear in mind is that, you know, when you're asking about the timing, you got to answer the state by April. It would be good for the staff level discussions with the City of Bremerton to result in some kind of agreement, because this assumes $1 million from the City of Bremerton.
Right.
That's the amount of the commitment they had all along, but that was a different kind of plan.
Yeah.
So we don't really know if they're signed on to $1 million with this plan.
No,
We
and that
can-
was one of what I was worried about earlier, and I had mentioned.
We can
made
make a case
promises.
for it being more than $1 million, but they can make a case that it should be less, so it's.
No, or not at all if we're not getting it to them right now. No,
Yeah.
believe me, that's,
Right.
and that was some of the questions that came up when they had talked to me about it
Yeah,
before.
the amount of pipe that is actually within the city is, what, about 300-something thousand, I thought. And the rest of it is oversizing to accommodate their flows. And that's where,
But at the same time, they can't get it without it in that area, it's our capacity. The other question is, those questions that you have with the public-private partnership that you're looking into, we need to get some answers on those, on what we can do and how we can pull that off, because that also affects the cost
Correct.
of doing it, and the timeline, as he mentioned. It is important if we do this, that we are set to take advantage of the benefits of an EIS. I haven't lost sight of that, believe me,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, we wouldn't make that investment if we didn't think there was,
yeah.
you know, this component to it, so.
So, just to bring everyone else around the table up to speed, commissioners are initiating work on an EIS, sorry.
Planned action.
Planned action
yeah.
EIS, thank you. So that will help facilitate development. All up front, we've got all of the traffic, environmental, all of the impacts identified so that the development community can come in and have a reasonable understanding of what it is they're looking at. in
it
terms
makes
of-
it developable.
Absolutely,
Yeah, that's good.
one more help.
That's a commitment. Good.
Just real quickly, Leo and Frank, not to put you on the spot, but.
Hi, Leo.
Anything that you have heard today, or any 2 cents about what it is that state auditor will be looking for, and/or the loan that you have to share with us and commissioners?
No, just gathering data for me.
Just give us a plan, right, Leo?
Yeah, just give me a plan.
All right.
Leo, have you seen the memorandum?
Was it on the website?
Yeah.
I assume.
If it was on the website, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't have anything else to add to it. I mean, it's self-explanatory. Either you raise rates or you expand into unforeseen territory.
Do we have capacity for?
Yes.
For debt repayment?
We have capacity for debt. Debt repayment is a function of the structure of the operation. So our capacity for debt is, we have very low debt structure. So we have a high capacity for taking on additional county debt.
Right.
Remember also that the servicing of this isn't taking currently out of general funds. We're using 09 funds and REIT funds. So it's not costing the general fund dollars currently.
And with that,
But the 09 and the REITs are maxing out, and whether we can use that to service additional debt needs to be analyzed.
and in all my years, I don't think I've ever said these terms that I'm about to say, but politically, because I don't usually think that matter, but I know that we're on the verge out there of people coming back at us, being angry from the past on the amount that we're spending now out of REIT and 09 on Belfair. I just know that. I get the phone calls, I've had the conversations, and I can justify it at this point because it is what it is. I don't have an option. The next decision is on my back. So if I decide to do that and to go for more debt and to increase that more, now when I answer them, I'm not talking about just dealing with what was put in my plate. Now I'm dealing with something that I'm saying, no, I chose to put that burden on. And I don't mean politically whether we get reelected or not, I just mean politically out there in the world, that's how they're gonna view it.
Acceptability.
Yeah. I just want to be able to justify it truly and believe in it. And that has a lot to do with that public-private partnership, it really does. Because there's an economy of scale there that we can maybe get more for less that we couldn't do without it. It depends on how it gets set up, how much money we can save. We'd lose that opportunity if, this is how I'm justifying myself and what I'm saying now, you lose. If we can take advantage of that right now with this loan, that's an opportunity cost. That's worth purchasing at so much of an amount that we won't get again. How much that purchasing price is depends on how much I have an appetite for it. But I do recognize that there is going to be an increase of the cost, what it's going to cost us to get where we need to go. Just how much can we stomach?
So what's the absolute minimum, the lowest number that we can go for an increase?
For rates or
Is it
for?
for the rates? Is it still the 113?
It's a balance between rates and growth.
Yeah.
Depending on, if you get really high growth, then the rates don't need to be as high, or I should say three variables: rates, growth, and subsidy. Subsidy is the default. That's the last resort. You don't want, but whatever you don't get from growth or from rates has to come from the subsidy.
So you also got to remember, we got to throw in one of the top three for business relocation or location. You've got, of course, your location, you got your access, you have your workforce, but you have utilities. That is the big one. No matter what, we are subject to a very high utility rate on our water there. There's just no way around that. Our PUD is low. That's a benefit compared to Kitsap counties. So we have but it's a little savings compared to the huge difference. So when we're comparing our utility rate, as you know, they'll take down, they'll pencil that out, and that's a huge determiner of where they put their business. See the number, please. Thank you guys very much for.
Oh, yeah.
So just to kind of be clear from my own, so do you anticipate coming back to us with some idea of what a public-private partnership would look like?
Yes.
And how close are we on what's realistic, given all the other things?
Right, yeah, given all the other things. 3 weeks.
Just that.
Yeah, 3 weeks.
Okay.
And that also will give us time to have more detailed conversations with the city of Bremerton. That's the other big piece that really needs to.
And what about do the loan, know the capacity on the loan of whether they'll do it as a line of credit, so to speak, for the whole thing, or by then too?
Yes, I will double check that, but I believe that is the
That
case.
is scary, but that's a great way
Yeah.
to do it,
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, take what you need.
And it might give the city some flexibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I like that a
And
lot,
I
too.
like that, I agree. I think that will be a win-win for the city, and I think they're already thinking that way, but,
Yeah, the staff is.
yeah. Yes, they are.
And staff changes. We just had that
Lots of
lesson.
electives.
Yeah, that's right, and that's why staff changes.
Well, I'm gonna tell you that this is a topic that comes up at the public work board meetings. And so they're excited to see the infrastructure and where Mason County is going. But that's one vote I'll have to recuse myself from.
Let's see, anything else? Oh, and then follow up, we can do some rate scenarios for existing customers and comparisons to nearby. Kids out rates, for example,
Yep.
to bring back as well.
They have been going up, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yes.
Hard to base it on gallons, so for, I think a lot of them are breaking down to get rid of their ERUs. They're going with cubic instead of ERU, which makes it a little more comparable to what we can see, what we're doing, how much they've changed. They made a lot of money doing that. They did, by switching it over as a raise.
All right, anything else, commissioners?
No, I appreciate all the information, some good things to consider.
My apologies if I come off a little rough sometimes. This is probably the thing that scares me the most for my community, or the time I have to look at it and deal with it. And it's not the wood glass, but literally, I've seen the doors closed. When we entered into our office, the real estate office that I'm part of now, there was actually a letter on the door that said, "Another business closed by the sewer." That's what they put on their window. And it's like, wow. So that's what I see in my head when I'm dealing with this. I remember all those buildings, I remember using Crazy Eric's, I remember all that had a huge impact on my community. I don't want to do that to them. I want to help keep them from it.
All right, and commissioners, I want to thank both Michael and Gordon. They have been working very fast and furious, and I absolutely appreciate their thorough work and their quick turnaround on products, and it's been a really hot timeline, and they've definitely risen to the challenge and done great work, and it's much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.